Story 1. They framed me. They fired me. And that's how they flipped themselves into a divorce, a prison sentence, and a handful of deportations. This is a long one, but if you stick with it until the end, you will learn how I was framed and fired from my job and accidentally set off a chain reaction that led to a staff overhaul with several managers being fired or moved to other restaurants, the general manager being fired and getting a divorce, and one of the managers being investigated by the FBI and ultimately arrested, as well as several of the workers being deported. Here we go. I used to work at an upscale restaurant owned by a large corporate entity that owns several different restaurant brands. I worked there for about 3.5 years before they eventually fired me, but more about that later. First, I want to give an idea of my role there. My role at that job was a little of everything. Since the day I started working there, I took it upon myself to learn as much as possible. I was very persistent with management when I wanted to learn a new department. I had started as a server but eventually had worked my way into different departments and job titles like carryout, hosting, bartending, bar backing, banquets, catering, and deliveries. My singular goal while working there was to make myself available for as many hours as possible. I was being paid about $12 an hour, though that fluctuated if I was working as a bartender or server and making tips. Eventually, it was noticed by management how I fit best into one of the non-tipped positions. I was so good at it that they decided to try me out as an unofficial supervisor over the team that worked in carryout, catering, and deliveries, as those were all one department. I knew this was going to ultimately mean fewer hours since I would only be working one department, so I negotiated with management to increase my pay by about $1.50 since I was taking on additional responsibilities. They were satisfied with the pay increase. I wasn't trying to get as much money as possible. I just wanted to be able to pay my bills and still have a little money left over for fun. I was living in the highly taxed city of Chicago, which is in the already highly taxed state of Illinois, so it was pretty difficult to make ends meet and still have money left to enjoy my life. I am a person of simple pleasures, and I can enjoy things for long periods of time, so it didn't take much money to be happy. A video game could hold my attention for several months, sometimes even years. I had a family pet that I had brought with me to Chicago, so that counted as an extra expense. Not long after I started this position as the unofficial supervisor, I got a girlfriend, so I was also going out more often and spending money on her. With my position and some smart budgeting, I was able to afford all of this. The money wasn't an issue, but management had a high turnover rate, so the incoming managers often did not know what the department entailed or how important hours were to workers of these departments. Eventually, it was noted that our current general manager was going to be fired and replaced. The incoming general manager was supposed to be some rock star when it came to improving restaurants. We looked up his name and found him as the first search result on Google, but the entry wasn't some glowing review of his work ethic or of his impeccable ability to improve the way a restaurant runs. It was actually a mugshot in a police report filed for repeated domestic abuse. This is important later. We'll call him Harvey. Shortly after Harvey came in and started making changes, one of our best managers gave her resignation. She refused to work with him and, like an oracle, told us to expect lots of sexual harassment and misogynistic comments, and for him to eventually run this place into the ground. Not long after she left, our general manager began replacing our current managers with hand-picked people that he had worked with in the past. Eventually, all but one manager was replaced. That manager was the kitchen manager. We will call him Frito. Frito had been there since I had started working there. He seemed to be something of a chameleon, as in his values and ethics seemed to change depending on who his boss was. Honestly, I sort of applaud his survival instincts but ultimately see him as a suck-up and traitor. Harvey never really replaced the manager for our department, so it ran without a lot of oversight unless you count me as the supervisor. We didn't constantly have someone breathing down our necks about how things should be done. Our department had some hiccups here and there, but it still ran really smoothly. Since we did not have our own manager, we often had to radio for a manager to come to help us out on things that needed a manager card for approval. Frito would always be the one to answer these calls since the kitchen was closest to our department. Over time, the new team of managers started to see Frito as the manager of our department as well. However, the hourly team that worked there still saw me as their supervisor. This meant that anytime Frito was trying to make changes that would ultimately hurt us, The team relied on me to mitigate those disasters or to negotiate with Frito to let us do our jobs the way we had already proven worked really well. Over several months, Frito and I would butt heads dozens of times. He and I were constantly arguing about how important hours were to the workers in this department. He had it in his head that we should be living off of tips like servers, but since most of our orders were carried out, they came in through Grubhub, and Grubhub doesn't tip. We didn't have a lot of deliveries in a day, and the tips we got from those were maybe $10 if we were lucky, but splitting $10 4 ways doesn't add up to a lot. It just showed that Frito had no clue what he was talking about. Eventually, we had a meeting with Harvey, Frito, and all the workers of this department. It was marketed as a chance to voice all our grievances and concerns with the changes they wanted to make, with no chance of retaliation. So the workers did exactly that. They talked about how Frito was trying to cut hours even though he isn't our actual manager. When it was brought up that they were attempting to hire someone to be the manager, the team suggested that I take over since I had already been supervising them and running things smoothly for the last several months. I was also the one that management consulted with when writing schedules, as I had an understanding of the days some workers could and couldn't work depending on their school schedules or family life. I could see at the moment it was suggested that Harvey and Frito made the decision on the spot that I had to be gotten rid of. Although they didn't say it, I could see the look they gave each other and instinctively knew that my days at this place were numbered and my job was going to be getting the axe one way or another. They made a bunch of promises to us about not cutting hours. They told us that they would stop sending all but one person home early and only leaving one person to clean everything and close up by themselves, as this wasn't a small department and it was simply too much for one person to do alone while still meeting health and safety standards. They promised that whatever hours we were scheduled for, we would work. We weren't trying to be unreasonable, so we told them that we usually have 3 or 4 people scheduled to work in our department. They could cut 2 of them early, but we always needed at least 2 people here to help close properly. The promise was made that they would always have at least 2 closers. However, only about a week later, they started sending all but one person home early again every night. One night, they tried to do it while I was scheduled as the closer, and we had just returned from a massive catering event, and there was an unbelievable amount of cleanup left to do for one person. When Frito came in and tried to send everyone except me home, I stepped up and told him that he was consistently breaking the promise he had made to us during the meeting. He looked me square in the face and told me to stop complaining about it, and if I was going to keep trying to talk to him about him breaking his promises, he could easily find someone who could work my shift. I quickly realized that this was an assassination attempt on my job. He wanted me to press it further, so I backed off and started cleaning. I ended up having to stay way late, and that meant overtime pay anyway. I got a write-up for that since we aren't allowed to work overtime without a manager's approval. When I refused to sign the write-up, pointing out that I had tried to explain to Frito that I wouldn't be able to clean up all that stuff alone before my scheduled shift ended, I was allowed to leave without signing the write-up, but only because the HR rep that was present at the time wasn't one of Harvey's cronies. Skip ahead to the day I was fired. It is important to note at this point that I always came into work an hour early since we lived in Chicago. Food was expensive. However, at our job, we were allowed to have as much free soup and bread as we like. So I would come into work 1 hour early every day so I could have some soup and bread for lunch before my shift. But on this day, when I walked into the kitchen to get myself some soup, one of the line cooks told me that he had a dish that had been canceled after he cooked it, and Frito had told him to give it to someone. He assured me Frito had already comped it and that it was free to take for whoever wanted it. It just so happened to be my favorite appetizer, so I happily took the free food. Not long after I got to my booth, both Harvey and Frito approached me and asked me if I had put in a ticket for that food. I told them that the line cook had given it to me and said it was the canceled order that Frito had already comped. Frito looked dumbfounded and said he had no idea what I was talking about. So Harvey told me, "I think you know that's theft. Go ahead and finish the food and then grab your stuff and go. That's the last meal you'll be having here." I tried to explain to them that I had been given this food by the line cook, but they refused to listen. So I offered to take them to the kitchen to clear it up with the cook. But by the time I had gone back to the kitchen with them to talk to the line cook, he had already gone home for the day. I had no choice but to gather my stuff, say my goodbyes, and head home. On my way out, I told the people working in my department that afternoon what had happened, exactly as it happened. They were shocked and angry but mostly sad to see me go. I decided that on my way out, I would stop by the accounting office and pick up any tips that may have been dropped for me that week, just to make sure I didn't get screwed out of that money. Before heading down, I had the gut feeling to just set my phone to record, and I stuffed it into my pocket with the camera rolling. Although the video was entirely black since it was in my pocket, I did manage to get a pretty muffled recording of Harvey and Frito's voices through the door discussing how things had gone as planned and that they had been trying to get rid of me ever since the meeting with my department. I knocked on the door, and they hushed up before opening it. They asked what I was still doing there, and I asked for my tips. They gathered what was in the safe for me and handed it over. Despite my anger rising at what I had just heard, I decided not to burn this bridge just yet because perhaps I could nuke it later. I offered a handshake to both managers, thanked them for the opportunity to work there, and left, making sure to pull my phone out of my pocket and record the front of the restaurant with the sign showing its name and logo. Working in a restaurant, you learn to always cover your own ass. It's true for most jobs, but something was just telling me I would need this all later if I was being accused of theft. I wanted to be able to prove it wasn't true if it ever came up in future job interviews, which is exactly what happened and where this all started going nuclear. On the train ride home, I sent some messages and made some posts on some local groups on Facebook saying that I had just been fired and that I was looking for a job as quickly as possible. By the time I got off at my stop, I had already set up an interview for later that day. I was offered the job about 5 minutes into the interview, but after going over the details, it didn't sound like it was for me, so I turned it down. I interviewed a few other places and found one that was a damn good fit with a hefty pay increase compared to my previous job, and I wouldn't have to deal with customers. It was an auditing job for a logistics company. However, during the interview with the manager of this job, he mentioned he had already called my previous place of employment and spoken with the general manager, Harvey. Harvey had told him that I had been fired for theft. Luckily for me, the manager I was interviewing with asked me to tell him more about that, and he was willing to let me pull out my phone and find the recording. I asked if the voice in the video was the same as the one he spoke to on the phone with. It was. That was confirmation enough for him that I hadn't made a fake video. He listened to the two managers in the video admit that they had set me up and watched to the end when I showed the front of the restaurant complete with the logo and name. The manager interviewing, who we'll start calling Dean, hired me immediately and asked me to send him the recording. I did. I thought that was the end of it. About 7 months later, after settling into this job quite nicely, HR sent out a welcome all our new team members email which listed all the newest hires, some facts about them, and had pictures of them all. They sent these out every time they hired a new round of people. One of them, Thomas, was a former coworker who worked with me at the restaurant. We had worked at the host stand together, so I was pretty glad to see someone I knew and liked coming onto the team. I sought out his desk and went and said hello and asked why he left the restaurant. He hadn't left willingly. He'd been laid off because the company was under investigation. It had started as a relatively small matter. The corporate entity that owned the restaurant chain had received an email with an attached video. That video that had been filmed from inside my pocket. That was cause enough for corporate to send someone to investigate internally. Thomas was pretty surprised that I hadn't heard anything about it since there had been numerous attempts to get in touch with me. As soon as he said that, I logged into the old email I had used when I first applied for the job at the restaurant. I had at least 24 emails asking me to come in to discuss my employment and termination. I never replied. I just didn't care enough anymore. I'd also changed my number since then, so they hadn't been able to contact me by phone. Thomas continued explaining that before corporate had sent someone, Harvey and Frito had talked with my department and tried to offer them all a small pay increase to spin corporate a story about how I was incompetent at my job and failed to live up to my duty. The day the corporate auditor showed up, there had been a small exodus of people from my old department. They quit on the spot in front of the lady from corporate, let's call her Audrey, and made sure to rat out Harvey and Frito before leaving. Strike one for both of them. Strike two came a couple of days after Audrey showed Harvey and Frito the recording that had kicked all of this off. They denied it vehemently, but there was no mistaking Harvey's voice. It's unique. Not only that, but the video also picked up their voices and mine when we shook hands and had a friendly parting of the ways, which was something they had already bragged about to Audrey, thinking it made them look better that we were able to part on good terms. This wasn't the actual strike two. That came when it was clear they needed to be separated. So Audrey sent Frito to work at another restaurant owned by our parent company and temporarily demoted Harvey to manager. This tore them apart. They had once been an inseparable evil team, but the pressure of the investigation must have pushed them over the edge. They ended up at each other's throats on Facebook on a public post on the company page. The post had since been deleted, but Thomas explained it as the following. Frito had been pictured in the Facebook post on the restaurant page, and Harvey made a passive-aggressive comment about how Frito shouldn't even be in the picture since he'd been moved to another restaurant due to misconduct. Frito saw this comment and said something along the lines of, "At least when people Google my name, I don't show up as the guy that punched his wife." To which Harvey responded, "Very funny from the guy who is cheating on his wife with Janet's sister." Not her real name, but Janet was the girl they appointed to officially supervise my old department after they fired me, the unofficial supervisor. Frito replies to that by saying, "Like you haven't tried with half the waitresses. They all have stories about you trying to sleep with them." The post was deleted, but not before it had been seen by Audrey the auditor. That was officially strike two. Strike three came the next day when Audrey started interviewing the female wait staff and bartenders, seeing if any of them could confirm that Harvey had tried to make a move on them. All of them were interviewed separately. Several of them had similar stories. Every girl that confirmed Harvey had made a move on them all said he had offered to be their sugar daddy if they would send nudes or stay after closing to fool around with him. Harvey was fired, but that isn't the worst of it. Audrey the auditor wasn't just some random woman from corporate. She was the old regional manager for this area and had personally hired Harvey's wife as the general manager of another restaurant in the city. So she called up the restaurant Harvey's wife worked at and told Harvey's wife everything she had learned from the female waitstaff. We learned later that they had gotten a divorce over him trying to cheat on her after she'd already given him a second chance to change after he had beat her. I don't know what compelled her to give him a second chance after something like that, but she sure didn't give him a third. After firing Harvey, the line cook who had given me the food was interviewed by Audrey. I don't know how it came up, but at some point he had let it slip that he was an illegal immigrant. She had his file in her hand with an Illinois ID and social security number on file, so this confused her, and she pressed him for more information. It turns out that Frito had some connections and had his own miniature black market going on where he would have fake social security cards and IDs made for the illegal immigrants he was hiring at reduced wages. It had been going on for at least 4 years. Needless to say, this is a felony. With the potential PR nightmare that she was likely dealing with, she felt she had no choice but to alert the authorities. Local PD enlisted the help of the FBI since some of the evidence led them beyond the jurisdiction of the local police. Frito was arrested and quickly gave up the names of the people working to whom he had sold social security cards and IDs to. I'm not sure if he gave up all of them, but he did name drop about 14 people, and of those 14, at least half were deported by the time Thomas had been let go. One of them was the line cook who had given me the food the day I was fired. Thomas went on to explain that it had all started with me being fired, but I never sent that recording to corporate. I'd only sent it to Dean when he hired me. I asked him about it, and he told me he had sent it to his wife since she was a lawyer. He wanted to see if I had a case to maybe sue my old job since what they had done was wrong. But he also remembered that when we had first talked about it, I had said I'm not the type of person who would try to make millions off an entire company because of the mistakes of two, but I'd also said that it would be pretty sweet to see them lose their jobs too. So his wife had been the one that sent it to the legal team at the corporate HQ of my old restaurant job. My boss showed it to his wife, who forwarded it to the real head honchos of my old job. They were both just trying to get two scumbags fired for what they did to me, but ended up pulling a thread so long that it didn't end until there were sexual harassment accusations, revelations about managers cheating on their wives with girls related to people they had placed in positions of authority, a divorce, mass layoffs, pending investigations, a staff overhaul, an FBI investigation into what could be considered black market dealings of falsified government-issued documents, and at least a half-dozen deportations and probably as many as 14. I don't know if this counts as nuclear revenge as I didn't actively pursue it, but Thomas ended up showing me that even if it wasn't revenge, it was definitely nuclear, and the crater it had left was massive. Now on to the next story. Story 2. Before we start, If you're enjoying this video so far, please consider liking and subscribing to the channel. Now let's continue. My 9-year-old sister was sent to boarding school but never came back. I think my family did something throwaway because this is seriously terrifying. I scope Reddit a lot and I really don't know where to go. But I hope I can be helped here. I'm 14M and I'm American but live in Asia. Being vague because I don't want this traced back to me if the situation is as bad as it seems. I don't know if I should give some sort of background or anything, but up until about 7 months ago, I lived with my mom, 39, and my dad, 41, plus my little sister, 9. I say it was because my sister is no longer here. She's in boarding school. I want to preface this by saying we are not bad kids. We're half white, half Asian. When my grandpa on dad's side got sick 4 years ago, we moved here so my dad can take care of him. Me and my sister worked hard to learn the language. Despite her age, she actually caught on better than me, and I was so impressed with her. The issue began with Grandma. She would really look down on my sister, and I love my sister and didn't like it one bit. My mom said it's cultural and I shouldn't make a fuss, but it was hard when Grandma really started making it obvious. She got me clothes, games, etc., but my sis got no attention. I should mention that 4 years ago we lived with Grandpa and Grandma. In that time of me getting spoiled, my sister got reprimanded for everything she did. I swear it was super unfair, you wouldn't believe it. Just under a year ago, Grandpa passed and my parents decided we'd stay here since I already speak and read pretty fluently. Grandma spoke to everyone about how rude and unladylike my sister is, and my parents went along with it when I completely think that's wrong. 7 months ago, her and Grandma went out and my parents said she'd be at boarding school for the summer. Just the summer. After 3 months, I got anxious and asked when she'd be back. And my mom ended up crying at the question. I was talked to by my dad and he said she loved boarding school so much she didn't want to come back yet. Like, is that how boarding school works? I don't think so. Maybe I've been watching too much TV or reading too much Reddit, but we're in another country and I swear what they were doing was emotional abuse. Still, it gets worse. After 5 months, I still hadn't gotten any contact. No messages, no letters, nothing. And that's when my dad started making her room into his office space. We actually got into a big fight over it and I ended up with more chores, but he never answered why he was doing it if she'd be back soon anyway. It's now been 7 months since the car trip that took my sister away, and the final nail in the coffin hit. I was looking through the attic for my mom and found a box with some of her old stuff, including her phone. Why wouldn't she have her phone? I really just want to know if there's anything I can do. No one will tell me which boarding school she's at. I'm told not to worry about it because I'm a child. I know I'm too young to do much, but if there's anything I can do, please help. When I think about it, I can't stop remembering the way my mom cried that day. It makes me shiver. I've been imagining the worst and I'd hate if it ended up being something along my mind. Update. Hi Reddit. It's been a crazy few weeks, but I absolutely needed to update as soon as possible. Sorry my post got locked in. I appreciate everyone who spoke to me via DMs. Sorry to those I couldn't get to, it was a lot. I should get on with the most important of the updates, what I finally ended up doing. So thanks to the super community that is Reddit, I was able to get in touch with a few different sources, the least favorite of which was a phone call to those who helped find trafficked children. I knew my family would be investigated and actually went to meet up with another family at that time. So basically, a Redditor close to my age who I'll keep private met with me and she had already showed my story to her family. They ended up letting me stay with them for a bit and made the proper calls to make sure it wasn't illegal. I actually even specified that I wasn't running from home and I'd come back after the investigation. It didn't sit so well with authorities and I was actually forced to go back home, but it only got stranger from there. I went back home to a completely empty house, even Grandma was gone, so I was allowed to stay with the other family for the time being. They were extremely kind. For a week, I didn't get any news, and bless her mother's heart, but I was told I had a home here no matter the results. So a few days after a week had passed, I got a call and it turns out they found my sister. My family had been taken in for questioning and were placed in holding for quite a while. I'm not sure why they didn't tell me this immediately, though. I don't actually know the full story, but my sister was living close, 700 kilometers away. Yeah, nearly a whole day's drive. It wasn't summer school or boarding school or anything like that. My dad sold her to get married. My mom was off the hook as one, I still needed a parent, and two, she wasn't in on it until it was a decent way in. My dad and grandma have been arrested though, and I'm back living with my mom and sister now. I'm still in contact with the Redditor that let me stay with her, and I'll forever be grateful. I have no idea what would have happened if I was around when authorities came knocking. She's my angel. On a more depressing note, my sister doesn't speak much, but she seemed to cheer up after I let her read my post. She said she felt abandoned and alone among other things, but seeing how I and plenty of strangers gave their hearts for her made her very happy. So thank you all. Sorry for being vague here, but I'm trying to protect identities. This isn't over by a long shot. There's still things that are going to happen, but I have my sister, and that's all thanks to Reddit. Now on to the next story. Story 3. I opened the marriage and now my husband abandoned me. Originally, opening up our marriage was my idea. When presented with the idea, hubby was strongly against it. However, after just one night of thinking about it, he changed his mind and was enthusiastic about it. I have set up rules and borders to keep everything private. Family and friends are off the table. Use protection. Hubby was okay with those. The only rule that he added is that we do not have to fulfill each other's intimate/romantic/emotional needs anymore. I was okay with that. I took a very classic approach to an open marriage and just started going out with other men. Hubby took a very alternative approach. He had built a huge man cave in the basement and practically moved into it. This is his room now. He sleeps there too. Doesn't want to watch movies with me, cuddle, or anything. Also, he started going to the gym with his coworker. They go out together and spend a lot of time in his man cave. She even sleeps over sometimes. However, hubby insists that they are just friends and he is not bringing his lover to our house, and I believe him. She seems gay. Our daughter spends a lot of her time with them. They play video games, billiards, and music. Sometimes they order takeaway food and eat down there. She doesn't spend a lot of time with me. The rest of the house seems deserted. I broke one rule and asked my husband about his intimate life. He says that sometimes he hires an escort girl, and that experience can last him for a month or two. I wanted to share, but he didn't want to know anything about my intimate life. So, all in all, he has managed to set up his life just fine within the borders and rules we had set up. He had compartmentalized every need in his life. He gets intimacy from intimate workers who do not complain, and company and emotional support from his friend who doesn't complain. I guess we are partners in finances and parents of our child. They made a plan to make a huge tour of Europe together. Hubby asked me if it was okay to take our daughter this summer to tag along with them. I wanted to tag along, he declined. I asked my daughter if she wanted to travel with me this summer. She said that I was boring and wanted to go with her dad. I'm starting to feel really lonely. Hubby is not interested in deeper conversations, touches, cuddles, or even intimate initiations. He is only interested in doing fun stuff. I talked with my hubby about changing the rules of our relationship so that we can get at least 1 day per week of our time. He said that he is okay with changing the rule about being emotional with our partners so I can find a lover who is emotionally supportive and wants to spend time and travel with me. I tried doing that, but it turned into a proper car show. I made plans to spend this Christmas with my lover and ended up spending it alone. So I resorted to using an ultimatum. I placed divorce on the table. Hubby said that we are financially much better off together, but if I want one, he is not going to make it hard for me. Now on to the next story. Story 4. As a 42-year-old man, I've suddenly found myself in the middle of an intense family drama that's shaken my faith in trust and loyalty within my family. My dad, a 64-year-old heavy diesel mechanic who has been both a mentor and business partner to me for more than 10 years, recently revealed something that completely turned my world upside down. To give you a bit of background, he has operated a small mechanic workshop for his entire career. Ever since I was a kid, I've been fascinated by my dad's work and would always lend a hand in his workshop on weekends. This interest led me to pursue a degree in automobile engineering so I could officially join my dad in his business. Since the age of 23, I've been working alongside my dad as a mechanic, gradually taking on more responsibilities and eventually taking over the management of his workshop. When I first joined the workshop, my dad had just 2 part-time mechanics and a single car. Leveraging my education and experience, I implemented various new strategies leading to significant growth. Over the last decade, we've expanded and now have over 35 employees and a fleet of 15 cars. In terms of financial growth, we've skyrocketed from an annual revenue of $250,000 to nearly $7 million this financial year. My dad's role has primarily remained in the workshop, while I've taken on a more office-centric managerial position. Over the last decade, I've poured my heart and soul into transforming our family business, building it from scratch. The countless hours of hard work, the challenges I've faced, and the sacrifices I've made weren't just for my personal gain. They were driven by the belief that one day I would inherit and continue to nurture this business. It became more than just a job to me. It was my passion, my responsibility. I've navigated through tough times, braved through various storms, and rejoiced in our successes, all with a steadfast dedication. My older brother Michael, who's 48, took a different path in life. He went to university and then carved out a career as an accountant in the city. Unlike me, he never showed any interest in our dad's mechanic business. In fact, growing up, he had a strong disdain for it. He was embarrassed that our dad was a mechanic and would often refuse to even acknowledge it in front of our friends. When I was helping out our dad in the workshop, Michael would get angry with me, insisting that such work was beneath us. Despite my growing passion for automobiles and my decision to pursue a degree in that field, Michael consistently tried to discourage me. He would tell me that my degree in automobile engineering was a dead end and that I should aim for a more prestigious career. Interestingly, despite his clear embarrassment over our dad's profession, my dad always saw Michael as his golden child. This favoritism remained apparent even though Michael had little to no interest in the family business and the work our father did. There was a time when things weren't like this. My dad used to show equal affection to both of us. However, everything changed when Michael was 15. He contracted pneumonia and became bedridden, causing a great deal of worry for our family. The doctors expressed serious concerns about his health, even warning us that he might be at risk of dying. It was an incredibly difficult period for all of us. I vividly recall the fear and anxiety I felt about the possibility of losing Michael. During his entire hospital stay, it was a defining moment that seemed to shift the dynamics in our family. Michael always wanted our dad above anyone else. He used to ask for our dad all the time. My dad spent countless nights in the hospital, which meant they bonded a lot. Eventually, Michael recovered and things went back to normal, yet my dad continued to favor Michael. Over the years, even when Michael would grow up to hate our dad's profession, Dad didn't mind and favored him regardless. As I got older, I obviously noticed this favoritism and was understandably hurt that our father always favored Michael. For example, once my school had an awards ceremony where I was going to be presented an award. I was extremely proud that I won the award and told my parents about it. My mother hugged me while my dad smiled warmly, congratulating me. I informed my parents that the school had invited them to attend our awards ceremony. I was aware that my mother might not be able to make it given her demanding job with long night shifts at the hospital, which left her exhausted during the day. So, with a sense of expectation, I turned to my dad, hoping he would confirm his attendance. He looked back at me with a hint of hesitation, his eyes shifting towards my mother. She then turned to him, asking if he could make it to the ceremony to be there for me. My dad then cleared his throat and said that he had plans to play basketball with Michael. My mother looked at him angrily and told him that playing basketball with Michael wasn't important and he could take Michael with him to attend my award ceremony instead. My dad nodded begrudgingly in agreement. The night before the event, my mother reminded my dad during dinner to make sure he showed up at my award ceremony. Michael, who was sitting at the dinner table, asked my dad if he was canceling on him for that basketball practice. My dad explained to him that they could always play basketball the next week. Michael immediately started expressing his discontentment, saying how he was looking forward to having father-son time and didn't want to waste his time at my ceremony. My mom fired back at him, scolding my big brother for lacking empathy and support, considering I had just clinched an award. She even went as far as demanding that our dad pull himself together for once and be there for me on the big day. I had to desperately remind my dad once more as I headed to school, hoping he wouldn't let me down again. He told me not to worry about it and that he would be there. During my award ceremony, I looked around for my dad everywhere, but I couldn't find him. My name was eventually called up and I had to go up to the stage to collect my award. I remember receiving my award from the principal while my schoolmates cheered, and I was fervently looking for my dad's face in the crowd. He never showed up. I sent my mother a message saying that my dad never showed up. She immediately called me, concerned, asking me if I was sure that my dad didn't show up. I told her how he wasn't anywhere to be found and maybe he must have forgotten. My mother told me that was impossible as she had put 5 alarms on his phone and she couldn't see his car parked in front of our house, which meant he was definitely out. At this point, we were gripped with anxiety, fearing that something dreadful might have occurred. Upon returning home from school, I cautiously pushed the door open and was met with the sight of my mom and dad engaged in a furious and explosive confrontation. Their voices were raised to a deafening pitch, and the atmosphere was so tense that you could practically cut it with a knife. The fiery argument between my parents reverberated through the entire hallway, leaving me in shock and disbelief. My mother, her face contorted with anger, stood near the entrance, while my dad, looking both guilty and defensive, was attempting to justify his actions. Feeling a mixture of confusion and concern, I cautiously stepped into our living room. I asked my dad curiously if he was okay, my worry palpable as I mentioned that he never showed up at my school for the awards ceremony. The room fell silent for a moment while my dad tried to avoid eye contact and mumbled an apology, something about losing track of time and unforeseen circumstances. I could sense that his explanation wasn't adding up, but before I could press further, my mother unleashed a torrent of frustration and disappointment. "Why didn't you show up, John?" she demanded, her voice sharp and accusatory. "Tell me the truth. Our son won an award and you promised him you would be there. What could be more important than that?" Dad shifted uncomfortably, clearly aware that he was in the hot seat. Before he could respond, Michael entered the room with an air of nonchalance, eating an ice cream. My mother turned her eyes towards Michael, her eyes narrowing in disbelief and anger. "Michael, what on earth were you and your dad thinking? Where were you guys when your brother needed you the most on his big day?" Michael responded with an indifferent shrug, casually mentioning that he had a sudden craving for ice cream and had convinced our dad to take him to the ice cream shop first. As if that weren't bad enough, they then proceeded to my school only to find out that they had missed the entire award ceremony, and so they simply drove back home, leaving me high and dry. My mother's face turned from anger to incredulity as she processed this absurd excuse. "You skipped your brother's awards ceremony for ice cream?" she exclaimed, her voice rising incredulously. "You and your father missed his big moment because you wanted ice cream?" Amidst the escalating tension, my dad, instead of apologizing and admitting his mistake, tried to defend Michael and justify his actions, stammering out an explanation that only added fuel to the fire. "Look, it's not a big deal," he began, attempting to downplay the significance of my award ceremony. "It's just an award ceremony, and there will be more in the future. Michael wanted an ice cream, and I thought we could just grab a quick one. I didn't think it was such a big deal." His words hit me like a punch to the gut. Couldn't wrap my head around it. The man I had counted on, my own father, was downplaying the importance of my accomplishment. The way he casually dismissed the moment I had been eagerly anticipating, his words lingering in the air, left me utterly speechless. What had begun as sheer disbelief now evolved into a powerful blend of anger and sorrow, a potent cocktail of frustration and sadness coursing through me. A lump formed in my throat, and I felt the sting of unshed tears. My achievement, the recognition for my hard work and dedication, was being swept aside as inconsequential. At that moment, I realized that it wasn't just about missing the ceremony. It was about the lack of understanding, the absence of support, and the crushing feeling that my accomplishments were not valued by those I held closest. I gazed at my dad, the very person I had counted on for support, my eyes reflecting a turbulent mix of disbelief and betrayal. The deep disappointment that had taken hold of my heart was vividly mirrored in my expression. Meanwhile, my mother did not hold back, voicing her own disappointment and berating them both for choosing an impulsive ice cream craving over a monumental achievement in my life. Their heated argument raged on, adding to the chaos of the moment. I continued to feel a sense of betrayal and hurt, feeling a heavy weight on my chest and a lump in my throat. I mustered a weak smile and told my dad, "It's okay, Dad. Don't worry about it." The words tasted bitter on my tongue, forced out to mask the deep emotions swirling within me. I didn't want to escalate the argument or add more strain to the already tense atmosphere. As I made my way back to my room, the facade I had carefully crafted for my dad disintegrated. With the door firmly shut behind me, I finally let go. Tears that I had struggled to hold back in front of my parents now flowed freely down my face. The sheer weight of disappointment, the sting of betrayal, and the deep sense of being let down all crashed over me like a tidal wave, leaving me utterly overwhelmed. My mom, seeing me upset, came into my room to comfort me. She sat beside me, putting her arm around my shoulder. She didn't say much, just let me cry and vent my feelings. Her presence was reassuring, and I felt a bit better knowing she was there for me. After a while, she spoke gently. "I know it hurts, sweetheart. Your dad messed up, and I'm sorry you had to go through this. Sometimes people make mistakes, but it doesn't take away from your achievement. You worked hard for that award, and nothing can change that." Her words were like a warm hug for my soul, and I began to feel a little lighter. She stayed with me until I calmed down, assuring me that despite the disappointment, I was still valued and loved. There have been countless times when my dad's blatant favoritism towards Michael over me has been painfully evident. My mother has confronted him about this issue on numerous occasions. Each time, my dad appears to genuinely listen and makes an effort to be more present in my life, but it's always short-lived, and he ultimately reverts to being superdad to Michael. It's a recurring pattern that I've observed throughout my entire life. Despite these moments of partiality, I have always tried hard to win my dad's approval. I have a genuine interest in his work and, in particular, developed a deep love for cars, partly because it seemed like something he valued. Even though it often felt like a one-sided effort, I kept hoping that my efforts would eventually make a difference and earn me the recognition and approval I craved from my dad. Last year, my dad filed for divorce with my mother, citing irreconcilable differences, marking the beginning of a challenging chapter in our family's life. I knew for a few years that the arguments between my mother and my dad had become worse and worse, but I'd never imagined that they would be divorcing. It was a difficult time for us as a family. Over the past few months, my dad has been involved with several younger women. About 5 months ago, he summoned me and Michael for what he claimed was an important dinner. As we sat down at the table, the air in the room grew heavy with tension, and a knot formed in my stomach as I braced myself for the unexpected news my dad was about to deliver. With a solemn expression, he finally broke the silence and began to speak. "I have something important to share with you both. Olivia and I got married." He looked at us as if expecting us to be overjoyed or at least accepting of his decision. Michael and I exchanged stunned glances. Olivia, his latest girlfriend, was only 30 years old, just a few years younger than me. The shock on our faces must have been evident, but my dad continued, seemingly oblivious to our surprise. He went on to explain how he had found love again and how Olivia brought joy and excitement into his life. I couldn't believe that my dad had decided to get married without even inviting us to his wedding or discussing it with us. My dad didn't just stop with that announcement and went on to say how proud he was of the business he had created and grown over the years. He said how he's been thinking lately about the succession plan of his business. I waited with bated breath for him to share his plans. My dad turned to look at me and told me that he had thought long and hard about this and decided that since I wasn't married yet and had no children of my own, I should forget about inheriting the family business from him. I stared at him, utterly perplexed, as he continued to reveal his decision to pass the entire business to Michael. Waves of shock and disbelief crashed over me, and I struggled to come to terms with the immense sense of betrayal that had suddenly consumed me. It felt like a devastating blow to the core, causing the trust one had in my father to disintegrate before my eyes. A storm of anger and betrayal surged within me as my dad dropped this bombshell. My entire world, built over a decade of hard work and dedication, was crumbling before my eyes. I stared at him, my jaw tight, unable to comprehend the magnitude of his decision. Why? I finally managed to utter, the words seething with a mix of anger and hurt. I dedicated my life to this business. I built it with you. How can you just hand it over to Michael? Dad, seemingly unfazed by the storm he had unleashed, explained his reasoning. Michael has a family, a wife and kids. He needs the financial stability, and I believe he can take the business to new heights. His words hung in the air, and I felt the weight of his favoritism crashing down on me once again. I struggled to keep my composure, my hands clenched into fists. This isn't fair. I've given everything to this business. I've worked alongside you and dedicated my time and energy, and now you're just going to cast me aside because Michael has a family? What about my future, my dreams? His response was callous. You can continue to remain in your position and work under Michael, but the business goes to your brother. That's my final decision. Despite the surge of anger coursing through me, I managed to restrain my retort. I turned towards Michael, seeking even a glimmer of support or empathy. To my dismay, he remained silent, avoiding eye contact. The disappointment I experienced now extended beyond my father. It enveloped my brother, who had opted not to stand by my side at that pivotal moment. I felt the crushing weight of a lifetime of favoritism pressing down on me. It wasn't just about the business. It was a culmination of years of feeling second best. The sacrifice I made, and the dedication I showed, all dismissed with a casual wave. Resigned, I muttered a defeated, "Fine, Dad, if that's what you want." I turned away, the bitter taste of betrayal lingering in the air. I decided to walk out of his house without fighting with him any further. I couldn't shake the feeling of abandonment, the realization that my dad continued to favor his golden child despite how hard I had worked over him. Later, in the solitude of my home, the weight of the injustice pressed down on me. The business I considered my legacy, my life's work, was slipping through my fingers. Anguish welled up, and the room blurred as tears blurred my vision. I had never experienced such profound isolation and rejection. Feeling utterly abandoned, I made the decision to reach out to my mom, desperately hoping she would comprehend the depth of my turmoil. As I recounted the entire ordeal, from my dad's blatant favoritism toward Michael to him taking away the family business from me and the overwhelming sense of being adrift, my mother listened with a mix of surprise and dismay. I never imagined he would go this far. My mother finally broke her silence, her voice tinged with sadness. To treat Michael so much better and give him the business completely instead of dividing the business equally between the both of you is completely unfair. Her words matched exactly how I felt, as I didn't mind sharing the business with Michael, but my dad had unfairly given it to him completely despite how hard I had worked over the years. As we kept talking, my mom's voice went from surprised to determined. She told me firmly, "Try not to see this as the end but as a chance for something new. You've done amazing things and you don't need his approval. Why don't you start your own business? You know, a lot of clients would rather work with you than Michael." Through her words, a flicker of determination ignited within me. If my dad thought he could strip away everything I had worked for, he was mistaken. The pain of betrayal fueled a silent vow. I would forge my own path and build something new from the ashes of what was taken from me. In the last 10 years, I have saved more than enough money for me to start my own business. The next day, as the reality of the situation settled in, I took matters into my own hands and embarked on a course of action. I reached out to a significant portion of our client base, particularly those I had personally brought on board over the years. These were the clients with whom I had fostered strong relationships and earned their trust. I candidly disclosed my father's intentions of handing over the entire business to my older brother and explained my decision to launch my own company as a result. The clients were as shocked as me, but surprisingly, the overall response was overwhelmingly positive. These were people who had come to admire my dedication, work ethic, and the values that I brought to the table. They assured me that they were willing to follow me to continue our successful partnership under a new banner. The news of my departure from the family business spread throughout the industry, and some of my dad's workers even approached me, voicing their support that they wanted to work for me. It was like people were starting to understand that after my dad left the business under Michael's care, this would be a sinking ship. I handed in my resignation letter to my dad, and he was shocked. He scolded me that I should not ditch the company at such a crucial period, but I scoffed at his response and left. As the majority of the client base shifted allegiance, the once prosperous family business started to disintegrate, with my dad unwittingly caught in the chaos of the fallout from his grand scheme. Helplessly, he watched as his well-intentioned plan spectacularly backfired. In the following months, my new venture blossomed. The unwavering support from loyal clients, combined with my expertise, not only ensured my survival but also propelled me to thrive. My father's betrayal served as the catalyst for my rebirth, making me emerge from the ashes as someone stronger and more resilient than ever before. The business I have built now, independent and thriving, is a testament to my tenacity. I can finally revel in the last laugh, knowing that my hard work, dedication, and resilience have prevailed against all odds. Meanwhile, I have learned from my mother that Michael has no idea how to manage the business and is struggling to retain the remaining clients. I guess word of my success must have reached my dad because he sent me a long message yesterday saying I was an asshole for not helping my brother and keeping the family business alive and how I had turned my back on family. He wrote how he was facing money issues and Olivia, his new wife, threatened to divorce him because he was unable to fund her lifestyle anymore. He concluded his message by urging me to do what he perceived as the right thing, returning to the family business and retrieving all the clients I had acquired in a bid to salvage our struggling family enterprise. Date 1. I want to express my heartfelt gratitude to everyone who has provided valuable advice and offered reassurance regarding my predicament. To clear up any misconceptions, I am still baffled as to why my dad thought it was a sensible idea for Michael to assume control of the business when we all knew he had absolutely no knowledge about the inner workings of our family enterprise. Michael agreed to my father's wishes because he knew how well our business was doing and thought this would be an easy job with me taking most of the responsibility. He had expressed previously to us that he was unhappy at his job. Hence I am assuming that he thought I would do most of the hard work for him while he and his family would be able to enjoy the CEO title. As for those wondering why I'm not married yet, it's simply because I've always been a bit of a loner all my life, dedicated to my work. While I do have a girlfriend for the past 1.5 years whom I love dearly, and we have discussed marriage as a future goal, we both agree that we want to take some time to grow as individuals before taking the next step. Irrespective of my marital status, I never held the expectation that my dad would hand over the entire business to me. I would have been perfectly content with a 70-30 split or even a 50-50 split with Michael, which would have been equitable, especially if I didn't have any children in the future. It was my intention that my portion of the company would eventually pass down to Michael's children, ensuring a family legacy anyway. There was no reason for my dad to be so mean and give the entire business to Michael. I did spend 10 years in this business, and I deserve to have a share in it. I also never forced any of the clients to choose me over my dad's business. They opted to work with me because I was always the one who would go the extra mile, ensuring their satisfaction and building lasting relationships. I never wanted Michael to fail or our family business to be destroyed. The business failed because Michael still didn't know the ins and outs of the business, and my dad was too busy with Olivia to focus on his clients. My dad must have assumed that I would eventually give up my business and come running back to him, asking for his forgiveness when I inevitably fail. Due to my relentless dedication and effort, I not only stand resolute but continue to prosper. It's truly disheartening to witness the gradual decline of a business I played a significant role in building. However, it's crucial to recognize that this outcome is a direct result of their own decisions and not something I ever intended. I intend to have a candid conversation with my dad next week when I have some free time to address these pressing issues. Update 2. I finally had the long-awaited conversation with my dad. He called me over for dinner last weekend. Expecting an apology, I went to his place. I entered his place and, to my shock, saw Michael sitting there waiting for me. The atmosphere was tense, but I hoped they had called me here for a resolution. My dad took a deep breath, exchanging a glance with Michael before dropping the bombshell. He started by saying how he was sad over what had happened between us and he regrets that our family business was now in pieces. I raised an eyebrow, bracing myself for what was to come, expecting him to say that he had changed his mind. Instead, my dad started pressuring me to return to the family business as soon as possible, claiming he would forgive and forget if I did come back. Michael joined the conversation, pinning the blame on me for the business's decline, his own challenges, and even labeling me as selfish for departing and leaving him to handle the business alone. I was left in disbelief by his accusations. Dad, you chose to entrust the entire business to Michael without considering my future at all. How can you lay this at my feet? I shot back, my frustration bubbling to the surface. Michael scoffed, adding, "The real issue is that you took the majority of the clients with you when you departed. That's the root of the problem. They followed me because of the relationships I built, not because I forced them. You were welcome to try to get them back if you are so good with retaining clients. Your remaining clients would have not left the business either," I argued, feeling the weight of their accusations. My dad sighed, "Look, I don't want to see the family business fall apart. It's my source of income, and it's how I sustain my lifestyle. Olivia has also left me because of all of this. I want to enjoy my retired life in peace instead of trying to resolve this ongoing family drama. So stop being so selfish and just come back and work for your brother." The room seemed to shrink, and the atmosphere grew oppressively heavy. It dawned on me that this was far from the apology or resolution I had hoped for. Instead, it felt like an attempt to coerce me back into a situation I had fought hard to break free from. Stunned and wounded, I rose to my feet, my anger simmering. "I'm finished with this conversation," I declared with a fiery glare at my dad. "I'll gladly watch your business go down the drain." And with that, I walked away from the toxic exchange. Ever since this conversation, I've been bombarded with texts and calls from both Michael and Dad. They've been calling me names and blaming me for everything. It's emotionally traumatizing to see how my own family wants to take advantage of my hard work, and I have blocked them for now. Update 3. It's been 6 months since my last update. I'm happy to report that my business is flourishing, and I am also planning on taking the next step with my girlfriend by proposing to her soon. She's definitely the one for me, and I can't wait to be blissfully married to her. On a less positive note, my dad faced challenges as Michael drove his business into the ground. In the end, my dad had to sell off the entire business to another company. Regrettably, he didn't reap significant benefits from the sale, and whatever he did acquire was claimed by Olivia during their divorce. I have intentionally distanced myself from both of them, having blocked their communication. I've learned about these developments through occasional conversations with family friends. Surprisingly, my relationship with my mother has grown stronger over the months. Contrary to what one might expect, she treats both me and Michael equally and has been a source of support and understanding in this tumultuous time. She understands my actions and is supportive of my new business. She has also informed me that Michael is planning to get back into accounting since the business has failed. Despite the challenges within my family, I'm grateful for the joy and stability in my own life. The support from my girlfriend and the strengthened bond with my mother are invaluable sources of strength. Focused on the positive aspects, I remain determined to succeed in my business endeavors. I'm optimistic about the path ahead and committed to turning challenges into opportunities for growth and success. We have reached the end. If you enjoyed this video, please be sure to like and subscribe to the channel for more videos like this, and give us your thoughts about the stories in the comments section. Thank you and see you in the next video.